she was betrayed. Her own father, standing there in his decorated uniform, actually smiled when the guard turned her away. "She's not even on the list," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, making sure the other officers caught every word. After 30 years of service, after saving countless lives in operations no one would ever know about, her family had deliberately erased her from their own celebration. But what they didn't know was that their forgotten daughter had just become one of the highest-ranking women in naval intelligence. And in exactly 3 minutes, 300 Navy SEALs would make sure everyone in that room knew exactly who she really was. The morning fog rolled in from San Diego Bay as I stood outside the Grand Naval Hall, watching families stream through the entrance for what should have been our family's proudest moment. The young security guard looked genuinely sorry when he checked his tablet for the 3rd time. "I'm afraid your name isn't here, ma'am. The Hayes family list only shows 4 names. My father, Captain Thomas Hayes, stood just close enough to witness my rejection, his weathered face showing no surprise. He'd orchestrated this, I realized. After all these years, he still couldn't bear to acknowledge that his daughter had chosen a different path than the one he'd mapped out for his children. He turned to Admiral Morrison beside him, speaking in that commanding voice that had terrorized junior officers for decades. "Some people just aren't meant for these ceremonies. They wouldn't understand the significance anyway." The words sliced through me, but not in the way he intended. They freed me. For 30 years, I had accepted his dismissals, his careful way of editing me out of the family's naval legacy. Today, that would end. Growing up in a military town near the Coronado base meant breathing salt air and tradition with every breath. My father commanded respect wherever he went, his broad shoulders and ramrod posture announcing his authority before he ever spoke. He believed in a specific kind of strength, the kind you could photograph on a ship's bridge during a storm, the kind that looked good in dress whites at formal dinners. My brother David was born for that role. From the moment he could walk, he marched. His toy soldiers were arranged in perfect formations before he could even spell the word battalion. When he spoke about joining the Navy, his eyes lit up the same way our fathers did when he told war stories. They were cut from the same cloth, both of them, and that cloth was decorated with ribbons and stars that everyone could see and admire. I was different. While David practiced his salute in the mirror, I was in my room with maps spread across the floor, tracing supply routes and calculating distances. I found beauty in patterns others missed, in the silent dance of information that could prevent a war instead of winning one. My mother would find me at dawn, still awake. Having spent the night breaking codes from puzzle books meant for adults. "Margaret's too quiet," I once heard my father tell my mother after a family gathering. "She'll never command respect. You need presence for that, not just intelligence." He wasn't trying to be cruel. In his world, leadership meant standing at the helm shouting orders over the wind. He couldn't imagine leadership that happened in silence, in rooms where the most important decisions were made with a whisper and a keystroke. The divide became a canyon over the years. When David received his acceptance to Annapolis, my father threw a party that lasted until sunrise. Veterans from 3 wars showed up to congratulate him, to welcome him into the brotherhood. 2 weeks earlier, I had been recruited by Naval Intelligence after winning a national cryptography competition. When I told my father, he patted my shoulder absently and said, "That's nice, dear, but it's not real Navy, is it?" Every family photo told the same story. David in the center, our father's hand on his shoulder, both in uniform when possible. My mother beside them, proud and glowing. And me, slightly to the side, often partially cropped out when the photo was framed. Not intentionally, they'd say if asked. Just the way the frame fit best. I stopped trying to fit into their frame. Instead, I built my own career in the shadows, where the real protection happened. My first assignment was aboard the USS Constellation, working in a windowless room filled with screens and encrypted channels. While David was learning to navigate by the stars, I was learning to navigate through layers of code that could predict an attack 3 days before it happened. They called me Ghost on my first deployment. Not as an insult, but with respect. I could find patterns in static, pull meaning from chaos. During Operation Steel Curtain, I identified an infiltration attempt on our Pacific Fleet's communication network. For 48 straight hours, I worked with my team to build a defense that not only stopped the breach but traced it back to its source. We prevented what could have been a catastrophic intelligence failure. The Admiral himself came to our cramped operations room afterward, shaking each of our hands in turn. "You saved lives today," he said simply. More than you'll ever know. But there were no photographers in that room. No medal ceremony that made the evening news. Just a classified report that would never see daylight and a small notation in my service record that most people wouldn't even understand. The operations blurred together over the years, each one critical, each one invisible. During Silent Storm, I coordinated intelligence that allowed a SEAL team to extract a diplomat's family from a country collapsing into civil war. The diplomat never knew how we found them in time. And the SEALs never knew who had guided them through streets that had become a maze of violence. But I knew. I remembered the weight of those hours, knowing that 6 children's lives depended on my ability to read satellite imagery and intercepted communications faster than anyone else could. Then came Broken Arrow, a name that still makes my chest tighten. Nuclear material had been smuggled onto a cargo ship headed for American waters. We had 6 hours to find it among thousands of containers, with no room for error. I developed a detection algorithm on the fly, something that should have taken weeks to code. My hands moved across the keyboard like a pianist playing from memory. Every keystroke precise, every second counted. We found it with 40 minutes to spare. The hazmat team sealed it, the ship was quietly diverted. And the world never knew how close we had come to disaster. My promotions came steadily, each one earned in those windowless rooms where the real war was fought. Commander by 32, Captain by 38, and then, just 3 weeks ago, in a ceremony so classified that only 12 people were present, I was promoted to Vice Admiral. 3 stars, they said, for exceptional service in the protection of national security. The Secretary of the Navy himself pinned them on my uniform, his hands steady but his eyes showing the weight of what he knew about my work. I didn't tell my family. How could I explain achieving a rank that few women in naval history had ever reached when they still believed I worked in some administrative office, filing reports that no one would ever read? My mother occasionally asked if I was happy, and I would tell her yes, which was true. My father never asked anything at all. Standing in that parking lot holding my uniform bag, I made a decision that had been 30 years in the coming. I dressed slowly, methodically, feeling the transformation with each piece. The white jacket pristine and sharp, the skirt pressed to perfection, and finally the shoulder boards with 3 stars arranged in a triangle, the weight of them both literal and metaphorical. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone my family had never met. Vice Admiral Margaret Sullivan, formerly Margaret Hayes. The name change made years ago for operational security, but convenient for keeping my achievements separate from their expectations. Today, both women would walk into that room as one. The walk back to the hall felt different in uniform. People stepped aside without thinking, their eyes drawn to the stars before they even registered my face. The young security guard's eyes widened as I approached. He started to stammer something about the list, but I simply said, Vice Admiral Sullivan. I'll be joining the Hayes family section. The authority in my voice was not borrowed from my father or learned from my brother. It was earned in thousands of hours of making decisions that mattered. The main hall was packed with over 300 guests. The Navy's finest gathered to honor my father's retirement and David's promotion to commander. The string quartet was playing something classical and forgettable. Conversations hummed with the comfortable rhythm of people who knew their place in the world. I entered from the back, letting the door close softly behind me. For a moment, no one noticed. Then, like ripples across water, heads began to turn. A young ensign saw me first, his water glass freezing halfway to his lips. Then the table next to him. Then another. The first SEAL to recognize me was Master Chief Reynolds. We had never met face to face, but he knew my voice from a dozen operations where I had been the eye in the sky, guiding his team through hostile territory. His chair scraped against the floor as he stood, his movement sharp and sudden. Admiral Sullivan on deck! The response was instantaneous. Every SEAL in the room, all 300 of them, rose as one. The sound was thunderous, chairs pushing back, feet hitting the floor in unison. Their voices rang out together, Admiral Sullivan, front row! My father's speech died on his lips. The champagne glass in his hand trembled slightly, the golden liquid catching the light. David stood frozen at the podium, his promotion certificate still in his hand, his mouth open but no words coming out. My mother's hand flew to her chest, her eyes wide with something between shock and recognition. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps steady on the polished floor. The SEALs remained standing, their eyes forward, their respect absolute. These were men who had trusted my voice in their darkest hours, who had lived because I had seen what they couldn't, who knew that behind every successful mission was someone like me making sure they came home. Admirals and captains moved aside as I passed. Some nodded, a few saluted. Many simply watched with expressions of dawning understanding. Whispers followed in my wake. "That's Sullivan? The ghost? She ran Dark Horizon? 3 stars, my God." When I reached the front row, David had to shift aside to make room. Up close, I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes, trying to reconcile the sister he thought he knew with the Admiral standing before him. My father's face had gone through several expressions and landed on something I had never seen before: uncertainty. I sat down without acknowledging either of them directly, placing my cover precisely on my lap. The MC, an old rear admiral who had probably seen everything in his 40-year career, cleared his throat and adjusted his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are honoured to have Vice Admiral Margaret Sullivan joining us today." His voice carried a note of respect that had nothing to do with family connections. The applause that followed was different from the polite clapping that had marked the rest of the ceremony. It was recognition from people who understood what those 3 stars meant. What kind of service earned them? Especially for a woman in a world that had tried to keep us in the margins. After the ceremony dissolved into smaller gatherings, they approached me one by one. First, Admiral Richardson, who ran Pacific Fleet Intelligence. "Margaret," he said quietly, "I've been reading your after-action reports for years. It's an honor to finally meet you." Then Captain Torres from Cyber Warfare, whose team had implemented 3 of my detection algorithms. "You saved my entire unit in Operation Nightfall," she said simply. "We never got to thank you." David approached when the crowd around me finally thinned. His commander's insignia looked smaller somehow, though I knew that wasn't possible. 30 years, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've been doing this for 30 years and we never knew." "You never asked," I replied, not unkindly, but with the weight of truth. He absorbed that for a moment, then said something that surprised me. "I was promoted today, but you've been protecting all of us, haven't you? While I was learning to sail ships, you were making sure they had somewhere safe to sail to." It was the first time my brother had ever truly seen me, not as the quiet sister who didn't fit the mold, but as someone whose service had been vital even if invisible. My father was the last to approach. He stood before me for a long moment, his bearing still military straight, but something in his eyes had softened, cracked open. "Vice Admiral," he said, tasting the words. Then quieter, "Margaret." He didn't apologize. Men like my father didn't know how to apologize for beliefs they had held like armor their entire lives. But he did something I had never seen him do. He saluted me. Not the casual salute of equals, but the precise, respectful salute a captain gives to a superior officer. I returned it properly, and in that exchange, 30 years of dismissal didn't disappear, but they shifted, settled into something we could both carry. The dinner that followed at my parents' house 2 weeks later was unlike any family gathering we'd ever had. My mother had rearranged the display cabinet in the living room. My service medals sat in the center now, including the Distinguished Service Medal that couldn't be publicly announced for another 5 years. David's achievements were still there, but they shared the space equally. 2 different kinds of service finally recognized as equally valuable. Over pot roast and red wine, my father asked real questions. Not polite surface questions, but the kind that showed he was trying to understand a world he had never considered. "How do you make decisions when you can't see the field?" he asked. "When you have to trust instruments and intelligence instead of your own eyes?" "The same way you trust your instruments in a storm, Dad," I told him. "You learn which signals matter, which patterns repeat, and you trust your training when everything else fails." He nodded slowly, processing this. My mother wanted to know about the pressure. How I handled knowing that hundreds of lives might depend on a decision I made in seconds. David asked about the technology, admitting he didn't understand half of what modern naval intelligence could do. For the first time, I told them stories. Not classified details, but the weight of those moments. The satisfaction of preventing disasters no one would ever know about. The strange intimacy of guiding people through danger from thousands of miles away, knowing their voices but never their faces. "Were you lonely?" my mother asked suddenly, her wine glass suspended between the table and her lips. "All those years doing such important work and not being able to tell anyone?" I considered the question. "Sometimes," I admitted. but the work itself was never lonely. Every operation was about connection, about being part of something larger. I was lonely for recognition from you, but not from the work itself. The work always knew my value. My father set down his fork at that, his eyes meeting mine across the table. We should have known it too, he said quietly. It wasn't a full apology, but it was an acknowledgement, and from him, that was everything. Later, as I helped my mother clear the dishes, she pulled me aside in the kitchen. I keep thinking about all those school events I bragged about David at, she said, her voice thick with regret. All those times I introduced you as our quiet one, when you were out there being extraordinary. You didn't know, Mom, but I should have asked. A mother should ask. I hugged her then, feeling her tremble slightly against me. We can't change the past, I said, but we have now. Driving home that night, I thought about visibility and invisibility, about the different kinds of strength required for each. For 30 years, I had been invisible to my family while being hypervisible to the intelligence community. Now those two worlds had finally merged, not with fanfare or drama, but with the quiet recognition that both kinds of service mattered. The road stretched ahead, lit by streetlights that pushed back the darkness in measured intervals. I realized that seeking my family's approval had been like looking for light in the wrong direction. The illumination I needed had always come from within, from knowing the value of work done in shadow, from understanding that some of the most important victories are the ones no one ever sees. But having their recognition now, belated as it was, felt like a door opening to a room I had never known existed. Not a room I needed to live in, but one I could visit where my achievements sat alongside David's, different but equal, both necessary for the world we were trying to protect. The stars on my shoulder boards caught the dashboard light as I turned into my driveway. 3 stars that represented not just rank but years of decisions made in darkness that brought others into the light. My father could finally see them now. More importantly, I had never needed him to. They had been there all along, waiting not for recognition but simply doing what stars do, providing navigation in the dark, whether anyone was looking or not.